What's going on, everybody? Mortem here, this time bringing you another build for Pathfinder Wrath of the Righteous, and this time we are talking my Holy Spirit build. Now this build will see you using a Shaman, as well as the Angel Mythic Path. Now with this particular build, I kind of built it around the Angel Mythic Path, specifically because the Angel can merge spellbooks with full Divine Spellcasters, which the Shaman is. Now in terms of difficulty, most of my builds are aimed at core. While late game, this build would be very unfair capable, early game, not so much. You would have a lot of trouble in the first couple of acts with this build as an unfair build. And because of that, I really just wouldn't recommend it for unfair simply because those first two acts would be a nightmare. But late game, it certainly has that potential. Now, as always, I like to start at character creation. And we are starting out with a Spirit Warden Shaman. Honestly, any Shaman archetype or even the base build that gets to choose its spirit would work for you here. I just personally like the Spirit Warden the most. But the archetypes that don't get to choose a spirit, such as Spirit Hunter, which has to take battle, aren't going to work for us because we're going to choose a specific spirit. Now, as a Spirit Warden, we will lose two of our hex choices, but they get replaced by a couple of things. For starters, Restless Magic. This is almost a separate spirit by itself, which is why I like Spirit Warden so much, because we just get these spells as bonus spells for our spirit magic, which we'll talk a bit more about later, just for free, which I think is definitely worth a couple of hex choices. We also pick up Unnatural Mean. At first level, we gain a +2 bonus to our Intimidate checks made to Persuade, which we will actually make use of, but not in combat. And then at second level, I don't personally use this much, but it's here, so why not? You will get a Channel Positive Energy for Damage Undead. And then at level 10, you pick up Laugh at Death, which will give you a +4 insight bonus on saving throws against death effects, which is pretty nice in general. And some other key things to note about the Shaman in particular is that they get an average base attack bonus, their caster stat is Wisdom, and they memorize their spells. Now, if you're unfamiliar with Shamans and how they play, they have a lot going on with how they get their spells, the spirits they can bond to. I would recommend you check out my Shaman class mechanics video if you're curious in the finer points of how Shamans work. Now, moving on to race, I prefer a human for this, simply because we need a lot of feats, and humans of course get an extra feat at character creation, or level 1. Now for our background, I like to pick up the Acolyte background. This is going to change our persuasion from using charisma to using wisdom, which we will have more of. And then we also add persuasion and lore religion to our class skills. Now that brings us to our stat spread. Now we're going to dump charisma down to its lowest, which is 7. We don't need charisma for anything. Technically, our channel undead, damage undead, would actually use our charisma modifier for our number of casts per day. But that's literally pretty much the only thing we'd use it for. Because of that, we don't actually need charisma because we took a background which changes persuasion to wisdom anyway. So charisma does nothing for us and we can just dump it. Then we can bring wisdom and dexterity to 18 and constitution to 12. Now for class skills, I like lore nature, lore religion, and persuasion. But for the most part, you could do whatever you wanted here, but you'll get the biggest bonuses to these three. Now, for feats, this is where things vary a little bit. Personally, just for fun and to do something a little different, I like to play this as a dual-wield finesse build. However, if you don't want to do that, you could very easily make this ranged instead because we have all of our dexterity pumped up. But truthfully, as a shaman, we're not an amazing martial class anyway, so either of those options is fine. If you want to go ranged, all you got to do is pick up point blank and then pick up the subsequent ranged feats in lieu of the dual wielding feats I'm going to pick up and show you later. If you want to dual wield, you pick up Weapon Finesse at level 1, followed by Blind Fight. Blind Fight is just a really good feat, especially for melee characters, because it'll ensure we don't lose our dexterity bonus to armor class all the time, but also it makes you immune to gaze attacks, which stronger enemies will use a lot. And then for our spirit, we are going to choose Wind. Now, we get a few cool things, but probably the most important choice here is that as a hex choice, we will unlock Air Barrier. This is effectively the spell Mage Armor, in that it will give us a +4 armor bonus to our AC, but at 7th level, and every 4 levels thereafter, that bonus increases by 2. So late game, you can effectively have a version of Archmage Armor without actually having to take Archmage as a mythic feat. Plus, at 13th level, this barrier will actually cause ranged attacks like arrows, rays, or just other ranged attacks in general, anything that requires an attack roll, to suffer a 50% mischance. and you can use this 1 hour per day per shaman level. You will actually get multiple uses of this a day as well, so this can be up pretty much 100% of the time. Now, in addition to Air Barrier, we will get several spells that we can cast as spirit magic, which we'll talk a bit more about later. And then for our familiar, personally, I like the Lizard Familiar because it gives us a bonus to AC, just a +1 bonus. All familiars will give you a +2 bonus to perception checks, as well as another bonus that ranges usually between 1 and 3 to things like various types of saving throws or class skills. Again, personally, I like Lizard, but really there's no wrong choice here. And then for our deity, this is a little bit important because getting the most out of the angel mythic path requires you to be a good character, so you should pick a deity that forces you into a good alignment. But beyond that, pick whatever you want. And that brings us to leveling up. So first things first are hexes. Now, because I made such a big deal about Air Barrier, you might be thinking the first hex you should pick up when you get one at level 4 is Air Barrier, but that would be incorrect. The first one you want is Ice Plant. This is going to give us a +2 to our natural armor, which is effectively just 2 AC. And then there is an item you can pick up in Act 1 that effectively makes this +4 as well, which puts it pretty much right on par with the base version of Air Barrier anyway. So I like to pick up Ice Plant first, and then at level 8, when we get our second hex choice, then pick up Air Barrier, and we can start to see the improved versions of it. Now, from there, the last 4 hex choices you'll get between here and level 20 honestly don't matter much. I like Protective Luck and Chant, but you really don't need any of them. The 2 important ones are Ice Plant and Air Barrier. After that, it is really whatever floats your boat. Assuming you decided to do dual wielding instead of the ranged feat options, at level 3, we're going to pick up 2 weapon fighting. This is going to reduce the penalties for dual wielding. 5, I like to pick up weapon focus dagger. This is important to understand that Shaman only have proficiency in simple weapons. So for finesse wielding, that is to say dual wielding using dexterity, that leaves you the options of daggers, sickles, light maces, and the punching dagger. So personally, I like to go into dagger, though you could use any of those if you wanted. You also don't have a shield proficiency, so if you wanted to go sword and shield or something, you would need to pick up shield proficiency. But I think dagger is the most robust choice. Then at level 7, we pick up fencing grace dagger. This is going to let us use our dexterity modifier for damage as well as our attack rolls. It is also possible to pick up a mythic feat that will do the same thing if you don't want to spend your regular feat on it. But either way, we want to move our attack and damage rolls to our daggers. And at level 9, I pick up improved 2-weapon fighting. This gives us an extra attack on our offhand at a -5 penalty, which is a standard penalty. Then at 11, we pick up Hammer the Gap. Every time we make a full attack, each consecutive hit against the same opponent deals extra damage equal to the number of previous consecutive hits. And at max level, you're going to have like 7 attacks, at least when it comes to melee, so Hammer the Gap can be pretty good there, especially against low AC enemies. Then at 13, we pick up Improved Critical Dagger. This just widens the threat range of your criticals, meaning that instead of rolling just a 20, you could roll a 19 and a 20. And then at 15, we pick up Greater 2-weapon fighting. This gives us another attack with our offhand weapon. And then at 17, you can pick up Piranha Strike. At the cost of your melee attack rolls a little bit, you can do more damage. You'll want to toggle this on and off against higher AC enemies. And then at 19, I pick up Critical Focus, which just gives us a +4 bonus to confirming critical rolls if we roll an attack roll in our threat range. Alright, next up, we can talk a little bit about our equipment. Now, the nice thing about this build is that you don't need a ton of equipment. We are going unarmored to make use of all of our dexterity, our Air Barrier, which grants an armor bonus anyways, alongside just buffing up our dexterity, which tends to get you more armor class than actually using armor anyway. And everything else we need is pretty general. Now, you're going to want to get a headband of wisdom or something that gives you wisdom, because the more wisdom you have, the more spell slots you have, and that's going to come in handy here in a bit, which I will get to. Beyond that, you basically want anything that's going to give you more natural armor, more dexterity, and beyond that, wisdom. So the only 2 specific items I would tell you to pick up is the Icy Protector Ring from Act 1, which you can get from the cleric at the tavern. It's a little expensive, but you can easily buy it before the end of Act 1, because this doubles the bonus to natural armor from Ice Plant. And then the second item is the Bound of Possibility Storyteller artifact, which changes depending on your mythic path. The Angel one actually doubles the damage or healing from your Sword of Heaven, which we will be using quite a bit. But beyond that, just the best stuff you can find will be more than enough. Now, before we jump into the actual combat bit and kind of showing how this is going to work, a few notes. 1, a lot of this stuff doesn't really work super well until you finally get your Angel Mythic Path right at the end of Act 2, start of Act 3. Up until that point, you're kind of just a basic shaman, which can be okay in martial situations, but their main focus is all of their spellcasting. So shamans are a full divine spellcaster, and they get an incredibly broad spell list. The main focus of this build is getting us the broadest spell list possible and incredibly strong spells through our angel merged spellbook. So if you know anything about shamans, this will make a little more sense. However, shamans get to pick what is called a wandering spirit, which means once per day, they can pick an extra spirit in addition to the one they chose at character creation. This will give them access to more spirit magic that they can cast per spell level, meaning that for every spell level that a shaman can cast, they get a spirit magic spell slot. These spell slots are for the spirit magic granted to them by their spirit. Through their chosen spirit as well as their wandering spirit, they can actually vary quite a bit in what they can just pluck out of the air, so to speak, in terms of spells they can cast for that day. Each spirit gives them a different spell list. So you combine that with the fact that we picked up our restless magic as a spirit warden, and we've already got a very broad spell list as a shaman. Now, it's not super damage focused, though you can do damage as a regular shaman caster. A lot of it is really good utility and healing stuff, such as being able to buff your party with various buffs, heal everybody up, control the battlefield a little bit, which is all very useful by itself in general, but we combine that with our Mythic Path spellbook, and we get our merged spellbook that the angel provides us. Now, the second you take this, usually around level 9, you're immediately going to get access to level 6 spells, which is nice in and of itself because merged spellbooks can give you a lot of spells. So this is why wisdom is so important. If you don't have enough wisdom, you're not going to have a lot of spell slots to cast this stuff with, which is going to slow you down a little bit. Now, this will actually also grant you access to level 10 divine spells, but only if you have enough wisdom to actually cast them. But the spells you get as an angel are very strong anyway. You get spells like Blade of the Sun, which will create a 60-foot line of holy energy, dealing 1d8 holy damage per 2 caster levels to all targets in that line. And as an angel, your max caster level is going to be 30, but even right at level 9, it's already going to be 12. Moreover, if you look at this spell, it says absolutely nothing about anything like the DC, a reflex save, because your enemies don't actually get one. Spells like this just hit the target, period. And even the angel spells that do have reflex saves and things attached to them, like say Bolt of Justice or Storm of Justice, which is just AoE Bolt of Justice, the reflex save is for the target not to be knocked prone or take a penalty to their AC, attack rolls, etc. The damage just happens regardless. They don't get to roll against that. It's not affected by spell resistance or anything. It just hits. And stuff like that makes the Angel Mythic Path spells incredibly strong, which is true of any merged spellbook class such as oracles, clerics, etc. So we've already got that insane amount of utility as a shaman and being able to move our spell list around a great deal, and then we combine it with this spell list from our Mythic Path, which gives us access to just ridiculous damage spells that don't even have to roll to hit. And suddenly, we've got a little bit of a powerhouse. So before we jump into combat, I want to talk about a few things from the actual Mythic Path before I start giving some real examples here. So when it comes to the Mythic Path, personally, I like to pick up Abundant Casting, all 3 versions that will grant you extra spell slots for all of your spell levels. This is great to just give you more casting. Combine this with one of the Mythic Feats, Sorceress Reflex, which will let you cast the first spell of combat, basically, that you cast as a swift action, if that spell is either level 1 or 2 levels lower than the maximum levels of spells you can cast. You can make use of this particular feat as soon as you start getting your mythic spells, because Blade of the Sun is a level 4 spell. And as soon as you become an angel with this build, you get access to level 6 spells. So the second you become an angel, you can take advantage of Sorceress Reflex and cast Blade of the Sun, which does not have an attack roll, just right out of the gate. And then still take another action to cast something like Bolt of Justice that turn. And then you combine those things with just the general advantages of being an angel, like your Sword of Heaven, which will give you a bunch of damage and things to your regular weapon attacks, as well as improve as you gain mythic levels. Now, you won't get this right away, but probably the best, in my opinion, Sword of Heaven upgrade is Speed of Light, which will grant you 2 additional attacks, but also make all of your spells of level 7 or lower quickened, which means they get cast as swift actions, which means as long as you have Sword of Heaven active, you basically get to use Sorceress Reflex every single turn in combat. And then you combine that with your Angelic Halo, which is just a nice party buff that can deal damage to enemies, or specifically demons or undead, reduce spell resistance of your enemies, even grant your team members resistances to various types of energy damage, and that's just very strong as well. In fact, all of this was so strong together that in my initial testing on core difficulty, I was able to use this to solo a Vivvin Vanguard, which is one of the more difficult enemies in the game. This was in my initial modded testing that I used to make sure mechanics are working properly, and that you will never actually be fighting a Vivvin Vanguard by itself. But I thought it was really cool that with this build I was able to solo this thing on core, albeit 1v1. Now, let's talk about our regular actual combat everyday scenarios. So in this example, we are level 9 and we have just become an angel and started Act 3. So at the start of combat, we want to buff up. We want to throw our air barrier on. That's very important that you actually use that. And then you want to use your angel buffs as well, such as Ward from Harm and Ward from Impurity, which just flat out grants full immunity to poisons, disease, ability damage, fatigue even, which is just a nonsense 10-minute buff that you can cast on your team members. We're also going to use our shaman buffs like Bless, Barkskin, Displacement from our various spirit magic abilities. And that's not even all the buffs, but basically the point is buff up first because that's how combat in Pathfinder Wrath of the Righteous works. And when you're ready, start combat. Now, as soon as you get the angel spells, you'll probably be using your actual martial attacks much less. So in this example, the first thing we're going to do is use Blade of the Sun, because we're level 9 and it's a level 4 spell, so we can cast it as a swift action, and it's going to do some solid damage. But then we can use our regular move and standard actions to actually cast our regular spells. So in this instance, I can use Cleansing Flame, which is another Mythic Angel spell, to just hit everyone as a big AoE, and we actually kill several people here. All of that combines to make our build here very resilient. While there are ways to get more damage out, we are going to be a very solid AoE damage dealer from all of these spells. We're going to be able to regularly cast more than once per round. We're going to be decent in martial combat, though that isn't exactly the shaman's strong suit. We're mostly going after the spell stuff here, but it's important to be able to melee everything every once in a while. And with our unarmored AC, we can easily push that into the realm that you would be safe even on unfair difficulty, especially with all of these ridiculous buffs that you're going to get. And that's just how we can deal damage. That doesn't even include all of the utility casting we can do through the shaman's regular spell list. There you go, guys. Just kind of a fun build I made centered around the Angel Mythic path specifically, but also utilizing the Shaman in a fun way. So I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, please remember to like, comment, subscribe, all that YouTube jazz. But regardless of any of that, truly, just thank you so much for watching. May you wander in wisdom and have an amazing day.